to be working with the MexiCali Biennial these past few months. It's been just great hosting this project. The MexiCali Biennial is something that one of our moderator, Daniela Lieja, will talk about a bit. But I'll just say briefly, it's a curatorial project, curatorial and artist project that was developed 12 years ago by artists Ed Gomez and Luis G. Hernandez. And it's had a number of iterations over the years, and it's been our pleasure to host this iteration of Calafia, manifesting the terrestrial paradise, a terrestrial paradise. And Daniela has been a really important part of the curatorial team on it. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce the panel, and thank you all very much.
Hello, good morning, or good afternoon. No, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm very happy and excited to be with these amazing speakers, amazing artists. And first of all, I want to say that the extended region in which the MexiCali Biennial has been working includes traditional lands inhabited by Tongva, Tatavian, Chumash, Cahuila, Serrano, Cocopa, Quechan, Kumiai, Luiseño, and many others. They are the caretakers of these lands, the ones in charge of holding the resistance against a continuous project of colonization that pretends to erase their histories. They are the future, past, and present of this land, together with indigenous groups that have been displaced from their own homelands, such as Mixtecos, Zapotecs, and Yaquis, who inhabit this land now known as California. So, yeah, I think the MexiCali Biennial, we have been working as from the extended region, we call it, of California, from Baja California, Sur, Mexico, all the way to the north of what is known here as California. And for this itineration that started in 2018, we used the colonial story of Calafia, which was produced in Spain, when the Spanish were coming to explore these lands, and they were fantasizing about this place as a paradise, which is a paradise, was or is a paradise. But they create the myth of Calafia, a black queen woman that was ruling with her warriors, and there was griffins. And they have like a woman group of warriors that attack the Spanish, and they have like different fights, and at the end of this novel, which is a fictional novel, the Calafia, the queen, get married to a Spanish guy, and she converted to the Catholicism, and yeah, just become part of them. But this story is just like part of like the point of departure of the MexiCali Biennial of these itinerations. And we wanted to problematize this story for different reasons, but in this moment, we want to focus in indigenous perspectives, because actually this story totally erase what was before, and who they are here, and they were there in that moment of the Spanish arriving and creating and discovering something that is already exists. And so that's why we want to have 3 different voices Unfortunately, Cindy Albitre is not going to be with us today, but we're going to put a video that talks a little bit about her work. So just want to point out a few things from the show, if you have the opportunity to see it. The show also explores this area as a place where many of us come from different places, and also we are struggling and thinking about our ancestors and how to live in a land that has been colonized and how we bring our stories. So there's different projects inside the exhibition, like Diane Williams, she's here. She has a piece called Katutuba, that means native in Tagalog. We have astral projections, Janga, and the Not Yet of Kim Sumfe, that address the original name of Los Angeles, that it was Janga. We have also Californiana from Monica Rodriguez, who studies the collection of the history of California in the Central Library and discovers very minimal numbers of books addressed to indigenous, the indigenous groups that were here, and it's mainly represented the history of California from the missions to the present. Then we have Es mejor encender una luz. It's better to light a fire than to course the darkness. That is a collaboration of Cognet Collective with Mixtecos indigenous women from Mexico that helped me migrate in these areas. And then Justil Cruz, we actually have a Xolotl, which is a pre-Hispanic figure on the show. And now I'm just gonna I'm gonna present our amazing speakers. And as I say, Cindy Albitre is not here, but I'm gonna read her bio because we're gonna put a video of her work. Cindy Albitre is a mother and grandmother and has been an educator and artist activist for over 3 decades. She's a descendant of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles, Orange counties, and served as the first woman chair of the Gabrielino Tonga Tribal Council. In 1985, she and Lauren Skikok co-founded Mother Earth Clan, a collective of Indian women who create a model for cultural and environmental education with a particular focus on traditional art. In the late 80s, she co-founded Tia's Society, sharing in the renewal of their ancient maritime practices of the coastal island Tonga. Cindy is currently NAGPRA Coordinator Faculty and CULB American Indian Studies Program. We have Pamela Peters. She's a great photographer and artist. She's an indigenous multimedia documentarian born and raised on the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. Her work presents personal stories of contemporary urban Indians in photography and film to commemorate the legacy of the Indian Relocation Program, a U.S. federal program enacted to assimilate American Indians in the 50s. And she's going to talk about this project and other projects and her current collaboration with Welcome to Tongvar with the Tongva artist River Garza. And then we have Melora Garcia, who is part of the family of the MexiCali Biennial because she started as a student in San Bernardino University, and she participated with the student show that we did over there. And then we invite her to be part of the show here. And we wanted to have like a young voice too in this panel. Melora Garcia is a mixed media artist whose artwork takes shape through abstract and representational sculpture, ceramics, glass blowing, and printmaking. Her art practice explored the colonization of herself, art, and physical space. Garcia attains by creating artwork that is further exploring her Pascua, Yaqui, Native American, and Latinx ancestry by recollecting and recording family stories, dreams, personal experience, and feeling of bliss, identity loss, and displacement encountered in the United States and Mexico. And then we have the presence of Vincent Whipple. Thank you so much, because he also helped us to create this panel with funds. So thank you so much for being here. Vincent Whipple is a Native American educator and advocate, and serves as the Director of Tribal Relations, California State University, San Bernardino. Whipple holds a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Harvard University, a master's degree in American Indian Studies from UCLA, and a doctorate in educational leadership from Fielding Graduate University. So right now we're gonna play a video about Cindy Alpit. We're gonna start with that, and then with the speakers. Thank you. I'm gonna say, but also like think about what she was saying about the landscape, as is the water, and also is like the connector of like many people coming in and out. And so now we're gonna talk with Pamela. She's gonna show us also a video first. She's gonna present part of her work. Thank you, Pamela.
Hi, Yat Ash, Pamela Peters, and Chia Touching in Islam. Ashti Bashis Chan, Tohadini Dashache, Ado Kitachini Dashanella, Quitaganazan Hishle. That's how I introduce myself in the Navajo language. I was born and raised on the Navajo reservation in both Arizona and New Mexico. I've resided here in the city. I'm what you call an urban Indian. I've lived in Los Angeles for the last 25 years, and I do my multimedia work, which consists of the urban Indian experience, and so a lot of my work is projected around our existence and our history of who we are as urban Indians. And that all manifested through government policies that were created back in the 50s, part of the termination policies that the government had with American Indians. And one of it was the Indian relocation. And I know that we discussed earlier about all the indigenous peoples that are in Los Angeles. And I want people to understand also that we have a placement here in the city. We do have a history of being here in the city. And I work closely with a lot of the tribal communities. I worked at the Indian Center, and I'm currently working at UCLA with the American Indian Studies Center as well. But my work is a collection of everything. It's through photography, through video, through poetry, and I also do some writing as well. But this is a poem that I created, and it's a collection of everything that we've gone through, that we've endured as Indian tribal people. And yeah, so I'm just gonna say that, and I'll just let you guys view it. Thank you.
I once lived freely in a time where no law and order was in command. I once lived before a trail of broken treaties was ever muttered a strand.
I once lived on land where the word partition was never understood. I once lived when our language was beautiful, spoken every day, and never misunderstood.
I once lived when our hair was considered sacred in our journal of life.
I once lived when eagle feathers were the compass of life. I once lived when water was free, sacred, and a gift of life.
I once lived with my people in a dwelling that was simple. I once lived without judgment of my brown skin because it was my temple.
I once lived with family, cousins, and friends and understood unity. I once lived when relocation was not meant to forget who we are as a community.
I once lived before boarding schools punished us for who we are with the philosophy of kill the Indian, save the man. I once lived when alcohol was not in our veins, a bottle or a beer can.
I once lived without the term redskin used as a delusional way of honoring. I once lived before sterilization was an act of taking lives, leaving spirits wandering.
I once lived before USDA approved diabetes was feeding our bodies. I once lived without IHS replacing our ceremonial medicine with antibodies.
I once lived before white crosses plunged into our souls and our homelands like scorching knives. I once lived before forts and Fort Sumner corralled us like animal archives.
I once lived without cowboys and Indians, where the cowboys played the superhero. I once lived when Indian warriors were known as our true brave hero. I once lived before Hollywood used our native homelands like concession stands.
I once lived when blood quantum was not known to drain our identity. I once lived before white settlers believed in the myth of manifest destiny.
I once lived without reservation suicides taking young, beautiful spirits, believing it was their fault. I once lived when our land was not tortured, raped, bleeding, and crying, and silenced with asphalt.
I once lived where our tradition was our religion.
Today I live with pride.
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 As a Dakota Indian woman,
Lummi Indian woman,
Dene and Northern Paiute woman,
Dakota woman,
Navajo woman,
Arapaho woman,
Paiute woman,
Cherokee woman,
the Shoshone woman,
Navajo woman,
Washoe woman,
Lakota woman.
I live and exist today.
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 I live and exist today
because I remember how I once lived.
Some of what's happened with the atrocities that we've encountered as tribal people. Before I start, I do want to acknowledge the Tongva people. I am a Navajo and I am living here on Tongvar land, and I have to say, when I first came to Los Angeles, I didn't know a lot of the tribal communities, and I got more familiarized with them just working at through the Indian centers, the Southern California Indian Center, the United American Indian Involvement, and I'm currently working with the Kuya tribal people, and I've also worked with the Tatavian tribe and also with, as an artist, with Tongva artists. And I think it's important, it's imperative that we acknowledge the Tongva people, especially as us as settlers, because we are all settlers here living in Los Angeles. And I'm currently working on another poem. It's called Welcome to Tongva Land, and it's the perspective of who we are as visitors living here on their territory, and understanding that there's still a vast community of tribal people, and also just the existence of the Tongva people through the names, through sites, through the history. And I'm starting to learn that, and I've acknowledged the fact that I have been ignorant and not really understanding that. But I'm making it an effort for me to, as a tribal member, to also remember that we do live on tribal territory. And through the work that I'm doing, I've partnered with a Tongva artist. His name is River Garza. And we are collaborating and doing a project about land acknowledgement. And that's one way we can get the community out here to understand that this is Tongva territory, is through land acknowledgement. And you can do that in the simplest way. Just when you do introductions and just, especially here, like we did this earlier today, it's just the land acknowledgement of where we're at. And when I do presentations, I do that. I make the social conscious effort to find out what territory I'm going to when I'm speaking like in Minnesota or Oregon or in Colorado, and acknowledge the tribal territories that they belong to. And that's one way we can do that. That's one way we can dismantle these colonial voices and these colonial narratives, is by land acknowledgement and acknowledging the tribal people that exist and that we do currently coexist with here in Southern California. So that's the effort that I'm making going forward with my work. And like I said, I'm working with the Kuya people, and we're talking about the importance of what water is and how we forget who we are, that we, 80% of our body it has to function with water. But our water is depleting quickly and fast. But we forget that it is, and it's been commodified, and it's been taken from tribal communities. And so I'm working on a project with the Kuya Indian tribal community with the Salton Sea, and how that water has been removed and eliminated. And I'm also working with the Owens Valley Paiute people, and how that water was taken from that community. And also how it was taken from my community in Arizona. And they were used to, for golf courses, really, and to drain the coal and extracting the land. But there's going to come a time when that's all going to stop. And what's going to happen? We have to live, and we have to function with what little we have left, and that's what my work is kind of shifted towards. It's just knowing the importance of who we are as tribal people, and I feel like that's who I am. I'm born just as a tribal person. I'm born automatically as an activist because I know the importance of what I have to do as a human being in order for our future to exist. Thank you.
Very important. We're gonna have a deeper conversation in a bit, but now Melora is gonna talk us about her work.
So I'm a mixed media artist. My artwork takes shape through abstract, representational sculpture, glass blowing, printmaking, and more recently glass blowing. So besides making things that I think are cool, my art practice is exploring decolonization of self, art, and the physical space. And I'm doing this by collecting and recording family stories, personal experiences, dreams, feelings of bliss, identity loss, and displacement encountered in the United States and Mexico. And I have, at CSUSB, I was a double major in studio art and visual studies. And with visual studies, I had concentrations emphasis in art education and art therapy. And I'm currently a teaching artist and mentor with Praxis City Arts Parks in Carson, California. Okay, so when I first discovered Calafia was in 2018. I was an undergrad at CSUSB, and I worked with Ed, artist in residence Melly Badagan, and 3 other CSUSB students over the summer. And a grant from the Office of Student Research made it possible for us to just conduct research on California's origin. And together we reimagined California's past, present, and future, along with Calafia's story. And that all kind of culminated in an art exhibition called Reclaiming Myth, which was a collaboration between CSUSB and the MexiCali Biennial, which they were doing Calafia manifesting the Terrestrial Paradise, the 3rd iteration of that. And the beginning of Calafia's story was really amazing to me because she was a queen, like a strong queen, not a princess, not like Xena the warrior princess or like a Disney princess. She was a queen. And so that idea kind of carried with me in my artwork. This is one of the pieces that I did. It's kind of embodying the strength of Calafia, described in Garcia Rodriguez de Montalvo's 5th chapter of Las Segras Esplandian. Also being represented is the San Gabriel mountain range. It has some of the tallest peaks in Southern California, so I wanted to emphasize that. And I did a traditional method of pottery, which is hand building. So I used the clay extruder to make these coils, and from the coils I used my hands to like flatten them out a little bit, flatten the top and the bottom, and I started to build to the point where like my arm was inside of this form, and I'm like smoothing out the sides to stop it from collapsing on itself. And simultaneously I sculpted Calafia from a brick of clay. So the next one. This one is kind of it's a series of prints that I made from an embossed piece of wall decor found at a thrift store. And I inked the plate, I ran it through a printing press, I let that dry, and then from then I added, I don't know if we could you go to the next one, Heather? The brown pigmentation is coffee that I used. And each print was gradually burned more severe than the one before it. This process represents the erasure of not only Calafia's culture, but countless other indigenous communities due to colonization. At the end of chapter 5, Calafia converts to Catholicism, and that really bummed me out. So through this artwork is kind of how I process those feelings. And also learning that the burning of like text and literature and artwork was part of the erasure process. So the next one kind of still is working with those feelings of like anger. It's created in a similar way to disintegration. The difference with this is that I hand embroidered the text discoverer, destroyer, and colonizer. The imagery comes from a larger embossed aluminum wall decor found at the thrift store. So those two pieces were like sold as a set together. And I just converted them to like artwork in there. And the artwork depicts large ships that resemble those used by explorers like Christopher Columbus or the individuals who found Calafia and the islands of California. And then the next one, that's a closer look. This one is currently on view here at the Armory. The artwork began as the journey for reclaiming myth. And then I added 2 more Polaroids to the series, which then it turned into the journey Baja California to Del Norte, California. For this artwork, I used a scribe to lacerate images onto the thin plastic surface of the Polaroid film. Using a scribe is most common in printmaking, so that's how I got the idea to like combine it all together. I just really found it funny how California was being mistaken as an island for a really long time. And I thought photography or like a drone would have made this process a whole lot easier. At least in the sense like the traditional way of cartography, like drawing out your maps, photography, and anything else that we have today just makes it obsolete. So this idea, well, with that in mind, I combined 2 outdated forms of visual documentation, dry point and Polaroid film, to express how the laws and perspectives towards undocumented individuals and immigration in the United States is just archaic. It needs to be revisited and changed. The coastlines in dry land are spanning from south to north. So it's starting at Baja California, the first one, and then it's going up the coast to Del Norte, California. And some of these photos I've taken as I'm traveling, others our friends have taken, but most of them are from Google. And the imagery kind of illustrates the landscape that immigrants might see while coming to California by land or sea. And during this time, there was a really large wave of people coming from Mexico, and another one that really caught me was people from Syria. They're landing on the Greek islands, like on rafts. So that's kind of where I got the idea of showing images of people like out at sea and also on land. And the next one is kind of what I'm currently exploring right now. The idea of reimagining the past, present, and future has kind of stuck with me. And I'm now using those concepts when thinking about Native American forms of artistic expression. And I'm kind of stuck on weaving and like learning more about that process, and eventually I want to do this on a larger scale, and that's what I'm working on. That's fun.
So now Vincent is going to share us a little bit about what is his work in the tribal relations, and then we're going to start a conversation.
Well, hello everyone. Vincent Whipple. I'm Dakota Sioux through my father, and I'm Dene Navajo through my mother. And I've been well, my involvements are actually cover a number of fields, but I'm, in terms of art, I'm a performing artist, and we have a chance to share a little bit at the end. My daughter's here with me to demonstrate one of our tribal dances. So I grew up in the traditions of the Lakota and the Dene, participating in the ceremonies. The Lakota people have a very strong powwow tradition, and so that's one thing I've been involved with. Part of my work is not only participating, but also continuing the traditions and sharing that intergenerationally. The work I've done with the tribes has been in the area of cultural preservation. Before I started at CSUSB, I was at 6 years with the Rincon tribe in San Diego County, and I headed up the Cultural Resources Division, which also included overseeing the Rincon Tribal Museum. And so we had a very strong cultural arts program, cultural revitalization program, especially trying to preserve the Luiseño language. And the 6 Luiseño bands, it was kind of a real collective effort, which they've developed over the last couple decades, working together to not only preserve their culture, but their sacred sites. The Luiseño went through a recent, you could call it a battle, preserving one of their most sacred sites in the city of Fallbrook called Tomcop. And it's really the source, the site of their creation story. And several developers, one of them being D.R. Horton, now have 700 homes sitting on this site. Palomar College has a satellite campus on this location. But the Luiseño bands, we work together to have tribal monitors present, to work with the developers, taking care of the discovered human remains, a lot of the artifacts, working with them on build and design alternatives. So it was a real collaboration, but more to the detriment of the tribes. So if you go down in this area, it's right off the 15 and 76 highway meet, you'll see this big development. The site of Tomcop. So this is one of the areas I've been involved with. But in terms of performance art, I've had a chance to perform professionally as well. I was part of the American Indian Dance Theater for about 6 years. I danced with a native choreographer named Rosalie Jones. Her company is called Daystar. She used to be based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I also developed my own company called the Wichazani Dance Theater. I also do creative writing. About 10 years ago, I had one of my scripts was workshopped at the Native Voices at the Autry Theater Initiative. And but I think my best example of the work that I do is the work that I do with my family to preserve the Native dance. And as I said, we Native people pass these traditions on, collectively, we share these traditions too. I've been in California since about 1990 when I first came out to do my graduate work. And the tribes that I started working with started to share some of their traditions with me. So I had the opportunity to study bird singing with several of the master teachers in Riverside and San Diego County. And along the way, have helped some of the tribal people, the California Native people, learn about the powwow traditions. So this is another tradition that we have, is sharing of the culture. And the performance art I do puts that culture out in the public, and I've always had to work with my family, with the elders, to get permission to go and do that. As you'll probably know, with American history, a lot of our culture has been destroyed, a lot of our traditions. I mentioned the Rincon tribe. They have less than 5 fluent speakers left, so it's really urgent and important for the tribes to maintain their culture and traditions. One of the things I'm really heavily involved with is supporting tribal sovereignty. The ability of the tribes to govern themselves, to make their own laws, their own rules, and to really determine their own futures. One other thing that I'm pretty proud of is having been involved with the MGM movie Windtalkers, which came out about 15 years ago, which told the story of, it really told the story of Nicolas Cage as one of the bodyguards for the Navajo Code Talkers. But being part of the cast, we felt very proud, the other Native actors, to tell the story of the Navajo people and how the Navajo language helped turn the tide of World War II, considering that tribal languages had been outlawed and were, as Pam said, some of the previous policies, the termination, the forced removal of children from their homes, and the disallowance of the speaking of languages in the boarding schools. So many of these individuals who helped develop the code, had gone through a very negative experience, but they turned that back and they helped the United States win World War II. So being able to tell that story, that narrative, I was very, very proud to do that, to tell the story of our elders and their role, in helping this world. So, in terms of education, I'm currently at Cal State San Bernardino. I'm the Director of Tribal Relations. I work with the area tribes to help bring more Native students to the campus, to the university. We have a partnership with the San Manuel tribe. They've partnered with the university for years on doing the San Manuel powwow, which is one of the largest powwows here on the West Coast. And they also do their California Native Day and their California American Native Conference, which they spend a whole week with 4th graders and elementary school children to help them learn the Serrano traditions and the traditions of Southern California. So San Manuel has really asserted their own tribal sovereignty, their cultural sovereignty, in preserving their own culture for themselves, but also putting it out in the public. And they've also adopted the powwow traditions from the Plains people and put on a really good event which supports the urban Native people and the people and the Native dancers throughout the country. So that's just kind of a little bit of what I do. Again, I'm not native to California, but California is not my home. I met my wife out here, who's also Danae from New Mexico, and so California has become my home. My parents met out here. My father was in the military. My mother was going to school in Los Angeles, so they weren't formally a part of the relocation program, but they just had kind of relocated themselves. And after that, they went spent time in South Dakota with my father's, and we spent time with my mother's family in Arizona. So I ventured back out here through the opportunity to attend higher education, and there's just a lot of opportunities out here to work with tribal people and to work in the public arena, trying to preserve Native culture.
So one of the Calafia from Indigenous perspectives was because we realized that our open call didn't really get to many Indigenous artists. And even if we address, like some of the artists in the show address different Indigenous issues and the culture of Native Americans here in California, we didn't really have, for example, a Tongva artist. And right now we don't have a Tongva voice in this panel. This time not for the lack of like trying, but it was like circumstantially that Cindy couldn't be here. We invite also Mercedes Dorame, and she has also like personal things that need to attend, so that they didn't work out. But also I wanna say that, no, like it's difficult, especially in contemporary art spaces, to connect with Indigenous artists, because I feel like there's like a separation, probably. Yeah, it's like difficult to connect. So we wanted to create this panel because we want to hear and get to know more about artists like you. And then also a lot of discussion came around how to do an acknowledgement. We are here in a Tongva land, and we are in a contemporary art space. The Armory is like a specific institution, is embedded in a specific community. We come from different parts I come from Mexico, Ed come from Whittier, and Luis come from MexiCali. We're like people coming also from different places. So how, I want to ask you, what do you think, like how an institution like this, or like an organization like us, a collective of artists and curators, can acknowledge in a way that it doesn't become like a formula, and in a way that doesn't become just like a institutionalized, like a phrasing and that's it. I want to like discuss with you what are the ideas of like how we can not just acknowledge but also learn more about these stories, about about your work, how to connect, and like when it's pertinent, how does it has to be like a plaque in somewhere. I know here there's also artists that in the public that has been working around these issues and also creating with art, and history and knowledge together. I know there's like a lot of efforts, and for me an acknowledgement is creating this event, but I think there's more work around it. So
yeah, I can start. For me personally, there needs to be participation. We need to include the local tribal people, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm doing that subconsciously with what I do, and when I get invited to be a curator, or when I start expanding with my creative outlet, I always, now going forward, I'm always including tribal people. Like for instance, I've collaborated with the Tongva artist River Garza, and I share when people are saying, oh, well, I don't know any local tribal artists, and I'm like, I know them. I can share that information with you. And I've curated where I've acknowledged local tribal communities here in Southern California. When I curated a show, I brought in River Garza, I brought in Mercedes Dorame, and I brought in the Kuya artist, I can't remember his name now. there's a list of people that I just want to make sure, and I've done that myself, where I'm like, I know they're out here. I need to find them. I just started curating a poetry series called Waging Words. And I wanted to bring in local Southern California poets. And people were like, well, do they even exist here? And I said, they do, and I will find them. And I found them, and I had a series at the Entree during Indian Market. And I had 2 Tongva artists, and I had a Kuya artist, Emily Clark. And Emily Clark is from the Kuya tribe. And Megan Dermay is Tongva. And Kelly Carvalho is from the Tongva tribe. And people didn't know this, and so I'm trying to, if I'm given the opportunity to work in any kind of art platform, I want to make sure that there's always going to be this participation of the tribal community. And, you know, like I said, I've also do the acknowledgement, but I think it's just really going out there and seeking these people, because they are out there. And now my roster of local tribal artists and writers has expanded so much, and I'm excited, and I share them. And I'm hoping with River, he's an amazing multimedia artist as well. I'm working on also another project, because my work has started from talking about us as a relocated Indian living here in Los Angeles. You know, I was born and raised on the reservation in Arizona, but I wanted to share about our relocation story and how that all came about, because I was watching PBS, and I was watching these stories about how, you know, the Asian community has migrated. They're the biggest community here in Southern California. Mexican Americans migrated here. African Americans have migrated here to Los Angeles. But there was no stories about Native Americans. There was none. And we've migrated here. We have a history. We have a narrative here in Southern California. And I think on a larger scale, especially, it stems from the education component of how they've eliminated our existence. And that's because of many reasons. But I'm trying to bring that back to the surface and try to, you know, we can do that through the land acknowledgement. We can do that with participation and inclusion, with finding these local voices and these stories and bring them to the platform. And I'm trying to do that, and I encourage everybody and everywhere I speak that we need to do that. And it's imperative, because it gives existence to who we are. Because when we eliminate who we are as humans, people don't see us as humans. And so because of that, I want to make sure that there is complete participation of tribal communities in any platform that we have, whether it's in poetry, whether it's in art, whether it's in storytelling. Because my whole objective of what I do as an artist is I want to change the perspective of how people see us as Native people. And when I started my first project, Legacy of Exiled Indians, I did that because I wanted to bring that historical narrative of us coming to the community, of us coming to Los Angeles, and how that all manifested through these policies that we have with the United States government, and how the government wanted to eliminate us as tribal people. And that all started from Indian wars, and that all started from, you know, through boarding schools, of taking children from the communities and enforcing them into this white colonial narrative to say, you know what, we're gonna kill the Indian but save the man. We're only gonna save a portion of who you are, your existence. So those policies were created. And then we have termination policies that said we want to ship you off to the cities, so hopefully you can forget who you are, because that is the only way we're going to identify you as a human being, if you forget who you are as a tribal person. But because we have a strong connection to our culture, it still exists and we're still here. And I want to do that with everything that I'm doing with my work. And I did Legacy of Exiled Indians because I want Southern California to understand that we do have a story. We do have a migration story of coming here to the city, but it was done for a political reason. And it was done by a termination policy. But young kids I was talking to a lot of young kids, and they don't know why they live here in the city. They're like, oh yeah, we live here. Well, we know that we have family in South Dakota or in New Mexico or in the Southwest. But they didn't understand that it was all for a political reason. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to change those narratives, those historical narratives, and bring our stories to a higher level of the platform of storytelling.
I think, well, I didn't grow up on a reservation. I'm an example of learning my history as being Native American through college. Taking Native American literature and just going to the powwows at Cal State Temple, learning that way. So maybe going to young artists like myself at a university is one way to get us more into recognized. That's
Test. The work I did here in Los Angeles County centered around the disconnection of Native people, tied to the relocation issue. Native people are only about 1% of the population, but here in LA County, that's still several hundred thousand Native children, families, elders. And so the work that I had done with the education program at the Armory Center, we certainly didn't work with all of them, but as many as we could, individually, preserving the culture, supporting the academic achievement of the students. But you have to realize too that there are, the government says there's 573 federally recognized tribes, but there's way more than that. State recognized tribes that don't have recognition. And so trying to meet the cultural needs of all those tribes here in LA County was tricky. So, our big groups were Cherokee, Sioux, Navajo. So best we could do was we could bring, a Navajo elderman to talk to the youth, talk to the community, and connect, on a one-time, two-time basis, bring in a Lakota elder. And so it wasn't consistent in the immersion that a Native person receives on the reservation. And so that's the disconnect, is the children, the grandchildren of the original Locadies stayed out here, and from time to time they go back. My family, we have to go to Arizona to participate in the ceremonies to receive those traditional medicines. Pam's video talked about a time when IHS, or remembering a time when IHS did not exist. And so, the traditional medicines are still practiced, the traditional ceremonies, the traditional therapies, the stories are kept alive in the songs and the dances, those narratives that the community has to know, the children have to learn, because they're life lessons. And so that's the reason to preserve the culture, is so that, Native people, whatever tribe they're from, will remember who they are. They'll remember, their place in the family as an individual, their place in the world, their place in the universe. So that's one of the tricks of trying to promote Indian education is to meet the needs of each individual tribal student, just individually, but also culturally from their tribal perspective. And so LA is a really big area. When I first came to California, and I first saw the bird singing, bird dancing traditions, there was only a group of maybe about 5 elderly that would get together and they'd sing bird songs. And that didn't strike me as odd at first, but over time you're like, people started to ask, well, why is it just the elderly men? And so this group of men, they decided that they were going to pass it on. So they worked with a group of Native teens from Sherman Indian High School, and they taught them. A man who passed away by the name of Robert Levi taught his family bird songs to this group of young men, and since then they've kept that going. One of the big features of the California Native Day at Cal State San Bernardino is a big demonstration of the bird singing traditions. And so you now see like young kids, 2-3 years old, doing the bird singing, bird dancing. You see the men and the women. You see so many bird groups singing, keeping these traditions alive. The California, Southern California Native people have developed their own gatherings, very similar to powwows, and they keep the bird singing traditions alive. They have their own competitions, and so the Southern California tribes, revitalize that on their own, and so that's one thing that an institution like this can provide, at least in the urban community, is a location, to preserve the culture. Native people don't live all in just one community, but they're really spread out. I used to see, certain Native students being the only Native student at their school. On Riverside, my daughter, she's only one of 2 Native students at her high school. And so, the powwows give the Native community an opportunity to coalesce and come together. And those are the Plains traditions, and I just talked about the tribes with the bird singing traditions now starting that. But here in the urban community, to get the elders together, a location like this would really help to bring community together. Let the elders teach. There's a silversmith that I know, Fred Curtis down in Orange County. He used to teach. He would teach, silversmith. It's going out. And so we would bring him to the center, and he would share those traditions with the youth and with the families. So I see the value in a place like this as being a place to support, that cultural revitalization and keeping those tribal traditions alive.
I just want to add too that what we can do is just really advocate that our education really creates these curriculums to include the tribal people. I don't think a lot of kids understand that every state in the United States is derived from a tribal community. Chicago, New York, North Carolina, Arizona, those are all tribal names. But we forget that because we don't want to understand that they derived from tribal communities. Even here in Los Angeles, I mentioned that I do video poems, and I did one called Welcome to Tongva Land. And it's just very simple and basic, just talking about how this was all villages and how Tongva still exists, the language, the people. We can hear them, we can see them. When you look at Rancho Cucamonga, Topanga Canyon, Tahunga, those are Tongva languages, and we forget that they derived from the Tongva people. So everything that we encounter has some existence to some tribal connection, and I think if we can just, pause for a minute and just kind of really absorb that, why is this different, and just kind of, look at the origins of where they exist from. Because all of Los Angeles Tongva people are still here. Their language, their sites, their community, the people, they're all still living here.
Thank you. very inspiring. I want to open the discussion to the public. Is there anyone that wants to say something or ask any question?
I go to school in the LA School District, and I think that you're right. It's really important that we learn about the original people of this land, because we don't learn about that. We learn very little, like we learn about the Trail of Tears, but we don't learn the specific, like, tribes and nations that were displaced and where they went and how they lived. I learned very recently that some of those Native Americans actually owned a lot of land and they owned slaves, and the white people just took that away from them, and then they just moved into their homes and started owning slaves, and we don't learn that. We think that we're like taught to learn that they're just like savages that lived, out in the wilderness and they didn't have any kind of structure, but they did. So I think that'd be really great if we got to learn that more.
To Pam, you mentioned there being a lack of representation of stories about, you call it like the immigration, the urban immigration story of Native people to say LA. And there is the fantastic film, 1961, The Exiles.
That's where my project started from. That's why it's called Legacy of Exile Indians, and that's the first project that I started was from watching that film. I saw the restoration when it was released at the Hammer Museum back in 2007, and because of that, that just kind of opened my creative outlet, and that's what really started my artistic outlook of creating the narrative of who we are as tribal people here in Los Angeles.
There's another very bizarre French film that came out a few years ago, and it also is somewhat similar to that film in that it puts forth non-stereotypical narratives about Native people, and it's called The Psychotherapy of a Plains Indian, something.
I've heard of that. It's more of a modern film?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know what it's called.
It's like Jimmy P., The Psychotherapy of a Plains Indian.
Yeah.
It's almost, I think that's it.
Well, Jimmy P., that was with Benicio del Toro.
Yeah, which is another weirdness that sort of relates to the Calafia exhibition.
Well, a lot of those narratives are created to create this, one, like what the young student mentioned, is this relic image. We're either the relic image, or we're either the savage, or there's all these stereotypes that have manifested through film. They pretty much, derived from Western films, and so because of that, that's what people's perception of an Indian is he's a savage,
right? He's
a killer, or he's, non-educated, or, a relic Indian. So there's many artists out there that are creating those, that are updating and making contemporary stories. And you look at the Sundance Institute, they have a Native Labs there. You look at the Toronto Film Festival, they have a Native series as well. And here in Los Angeles, there's also Native Skins that's run by Venus Garoda, and he is a curator of a lot of Native films that come to Los Angeles. And in November, unfortunately, there's so many events happening, but there is Skin Fest that really showcases a lot of Native Americans that are creating Native stories in a contemporary context. So you guys can look out for that.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time. Could I just say one other thing? Okay, I'm sorry, because I just wanted, but, and this is meant with respect, and it's kind of, it's complicated, this is probably not, but I get stuck when I hear tribal territories or the word owning or belonging, because I guess I came up to the extent that we, you know, with the notion that land ownership was a colonialist idea.
It's a Western ideology, yeah.
So wouldn't the discussion, like land acknowledgement, like this land belong to, you know, to us, wouldn't it be more fruitful to find a different way of expressing, like an apology or an acknowledgement of the history, rather than saying, using the word owning, or, do you know what I'm saying? Sacred sites are something separate, but to introduce or reintroduce the idea of ownership seems to be counter to, I think you know what I'm saying. It's complicated.
Well, I get that, and that's why I do the acknowledgement to say this is the territory that once, you know, belonged to the Tongva territory, but it's that colonial mindset that we have to, you know, I guess break out of, and it's still Tongva territory. I think just acknowledging the tribe, but I don't want to say this was. I get what you're saying, and it's complicated because we all are living in this Western ideology, and those are the terms that, you know, come to the surface that people can understand, and that's how we relate to each other. But it's just how it's created. I get what you're saying, though. I don't know. That's something, you know, to revisit.
Thank you for today, and I want you to know how encouraged I am that you acknowledge your heritage, ownership, or whatever you call it. I appreciate hearing all of this. My question to you is the term Indian, and so you do refer to yourselves as Indian? Because I thought that came from the Europeans.
I'm not going to speak for everybody, I'm just going to speak for myself. It goes back and forth between Native American and Indian. Indian is more of a political terminology. It's used to define who we are with the United States government. That is just a term that I use. I go back and forth between American Indian and Native American, but I like to start first from who I am, which is Dene, and then go into Navajo, and then go into Native American and American Indian. But it's political, and I still say it. For me, I still say it because my ancestors fought with that identity. So because of that, it has a historical meaning to me personally, not to everybody, but to me it does. It's very hard for me sometimes to say Native American, even though that's become such a contemporary term. Because I've come to understand that anybody can say they're Native American. Any culture, any community can say that because they have lived here for so long. And I tend to go back to the Indian term because it's a political term. It's what my ancestors fought and how they were identified. And because of that, I use that because it has a historical context to it.
I would have to agree with Pam. I think my own experience is that as a Native person, I self-identify first, in the proper way in the culture, identifying your clans in the Navajo way, the Lakota way. I have a personal Lakota name which I use, and depending on the context, that's how I know, not my English name, Vincent Whipple, but Lakota name, which is Akaluta Hakhokshilawashte. So there's a whole narrative behind that, how I got that, what it means, and so the community understands that, and they when I say that, they understand like what family I'm from, in the community. But my experience has been that tribes tend to prefer their own tribal name for themselves in the language, and yeah, the Native American Indian, are political terms.
Could you speak to any political movements or coalition building that Native American communities are engaged in at the moment in order to sort of, I guess, change the living conditions of those communities?
Yeah. So there's I mentioned the work I did down in San Diego County with the Recon tribe. There's 6 Luiseño bands that they have their differences, but when it comes to protection of sacred sites, they do coalesce together. Statewide, I believe the California tribes really have a good unity. The uniqueness of California in terms of their own native experience is very unique. It's opposed to the plains, opposed to the East Coast, Northwest, and I believe they do stand together. A number of tribes, in terms of the services, whether it's medical, whether it's social service, they do come together in coalitions. The Torres Martinez tribe back in about 2003 had a coalition of about 12 tribes where they worked together to provide services amongst different tribes here in Southern California. There's down in San Diego County, the Kumeyaay have a Kumeyaay repatriation committee where they collectively work together as Kumeyaay bands to protect all of their sacred sites throughout Southern San Diego County. So the tribes do come together, on various issues, but they a lot of times stand alone. I've seen how gaming has been a little divisive amongst tribes. I mentioned this partnership amongst the Luiseño bands to protect their culture. They're very divided sometimes when it comes to gaming and the partnerships that they make with some of the larger casino enterprises with say for instance Harris. And so they're both united and divided at the same time. But that's just kind of the individuality. But I think on a national level, Native people have this common history, this common negative experience, where they are able to stand together, but at the same time too, at the local level, they do have their own issues that they confront.
One more question, and then we're going to have the performance.
Hi, I lived close to the Navajo Reservation for about 30 years. And I've been out here since 2010. It's my 4th trip to Southern California, started living here. And I found Native people hard to find. I live in Pasadena, and I have lived in Glendale too, and I just do not see much. And I saw this in the paper today. I walked a mile to get here. And, I just couldn't wait to get here because you're visible. I can see you. I can talk to you. I would like to talk to you and find out. I'm a poet too, and to send you some of my poems from New Mexico. And I've toured the Rosebud Reservation, so I know something about the Lakota. And it's just wonderful to have you here, and I just want to thank you so much. Is there a website on which I can find events, and maybe some close that I can get to?
Well, I just started at UCLA, so I work for the American Indian Study Center. And so we have, if you Google that, you can find local events that I'm helping curate and put together. I think your community does that as well, your university. So most of the universities out here do have American Indian Studies, and they do have a lot of community events. Yeah, we're everywhere. We're everywhere. I think because we're always misidentified. I can be identified as pretty much anything before anyone even sees that me as a tribal person, as a Navajo, a Dene woman. But we're everywhere. I've just been at the university, I've ran into 5 tribal people that just work like off-site or on campus. And I think I just can vibe with them. So, yeah, but we're everywhere. We're all over the place. You may find one at Starbucks. You may find, someone on the bus. That's how I found them.
You're actually the second Navajo that I've met in the years that I've been out here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much to the speakers. This was very inspiring, and I wish we have more time. But we should keep doing these type of conversations in temporary art spaces where I work. But also, I want to ask you to stay because we're going to have an amazing performance that the daughter of Vincent is going to do here. And it's a privilege to have this performance here. Thank you, Vincent. Do you want to introduce her?
I mentioned that as a performing artist, I preserve traditional traditions, but I also perform in the public space. I spent about 5 years at Knott's Berry Farm in an entertainment city, trying to convince people that this was our real culture. We did demonstrations of songs and dances from the Southwest, from the plains, and we tried to bring people in from different tribal traditions to share that in the public arena. One of our original performers is still there. You've got to see him. His name is Gary Sulcer. He's Potawatomi. And but the dance we're going to demonstrate today is known as the hoop dance, and it's a traditional dance from the Pueblo peoples. It tells the story of creation, and so it's something that when you break the dance down, tells a story of all the living beings on the earth, and it's something which was taught to the children. To be aware of the world, be aware of the environment, be aware of your connection to the universe. But it also was a way of helping them to maintain their physical fitness. It was a way to make them think creatively. How do you work with these hoops? It's almost like to learn basketball, learn lacrosse. You have to develop certain skills, and so the children were given these opportunities in a traditional setting to develop themselves, to learn each year. Each of the hoop dancers that you'll see has a set number of hoops that they use. I think the minimum is probably about 5. One of my mentors, a Yakima native by the name of Terry Grodell, uses 41. So the story that each dancer tells is different. They individualize it. They customize it. So actually the hoop dance it's the second dance that you're going to see. Rowley's also going to do the fancy shawl. This also comes from the Great Plains area, and it's a story of rebirth, of growth, of transformation. The fancy shawl dancer tells the story of the emergence of a butterfly from a cocoon, and you'll see that dance in the shawl. And so this is Valerie, first of all, going to do the fancy shawl dance.
Hey,
environments. We say that we walk in two worlds, the traditional world and the contemporary world. And they talked about my role as a teacher of culture to Native youth. And I myself was in that role at one time. You know, I had to learn these things. And as the elders that taught me passed on, then it became my responsibility to pass these on, and especially with my family. That's something that I take very seriously. So Valerie has really taken it upon herself that she sees the importance and the value of her culture and her traditions in her life. And as she saw me dance, as she saw her mother dance, as she saw various master dancers in the community dance, she said, I want to do that too. So she was never forced to do this dance. She just, actually one day, she watched it. I had some hoops at home, and she just picked them up and just started doing it and said, Dad, look at this. And she could do the hoop dance. So it was just, it's a part of her. Like she said, she's been doing this throughout her life, but she's also a contemporary dancer. She's studied ballet since she was in elementary school. She studies modern dance, hip hop, jazz, all the various contemporary styles. So you know, she blends all of that, and but I think this is kind of one of her favorite dances, the hoop dance. And again, this is her version. Valerie is a 10th grader at La Sierra High School in Riverside. And as I said, she's one of 2 Native students at her school. And so she represents herself, she represents her culture, her traditions, her family, herself with a lot of pride. So this is the Native American hoop dance. That was Valerie Whipple, Lakota and Danae. I'll turn this back over to our moderator.
Well, I just want to say thank you. This was so beautiful and amazing, and thank you everybody that came here. We still have some food if you want to grab something, and we're going to have the final round of the MexiCali Biennial of Calafia at MexiCali, Mexico next weekend. So if you want to come all the way there, we're going to have some performances and exhibitions there. Thank you.